Hi, Ed Augusts again. Let's take a look tonight at the chart for Mark Twain, Samuel Langhorne Clemens. And we find that a prominent planet here is Jupiter. It's up near the midheaven, actually in the ninth house. Here's the range for the ninth house from the midheaven down to this point here. And he happens to have it in Cancer. It's a water sign. It's a planet of travel and education. Guess where he traveled? He traveled an awful lot over water. He traveled up and down the Mississippi. He traveled across the Atlantic when he was writing one of his first books about European travel. And then later in life he crossed the Pacific, and I think that was on one of his comebacks when he needed to raise some money, and circumnavigated the world basically, and did lots of lectures and presentations and things like that, which he was able to do with Jupiter up here in the ninth house. It gave him a lot of energy. But what provided him the energy to do all that talking and all of that writing was planet Mercury, and Mercury is the planet that has the most to do with writing and speaking. And he has Mercury in 18 degrees of Scorpio. That's a water sign. And here's Jupiter up here sitting at 14, almost 15 degrees of Cancer, another water sign. So this aspect that's formed is called a trine, T-R-I-N-E. And it's benefic, harmonious, positive aspect, which means that he can see and think very, very clearly, having to do with travels and with philosophy. That's a real philosophy of life here with the planet Jupiter. And a lot of the best things that he did, including his positive and progressive surges of temperament that you see, the way that he could go up through society and be with the Boston Brahms, as well as in London and every place else. He could fit into almost any society, whether it was in Virginia City, Nevada, or San Francisco, or Hartford, Connecticut. He did have another aspect that's aligned with Jupiter here, which was not so good, and that is Pluto down here is in another aspect, but this is a square. This is in 12 degrees Aries. Now this is a fire sign, this is a water sign. These are 3 signs apart. That's 90 degrees, 30, 60, 90, and that's a negative, harsh aspect. Jupiter squaring Pluto can make a person stubborn. It can make him judgmental. It can make him think that he knows a lot more than he does, and jump into things including investments and speculations. And Mark Twain lost his entire fortune in the early 1890s because of an invention, printing, a sort of a printing process, something that preceded the linotype machine that he heavily invested in. And when that went out of business, he also had a publishing house, and that also went out of business. So that is an aspect, Jupiter square Pluto. And these are like equations, these are like mathematical equations. You add this and this together along with other major aspects, and you get the man, out of this. What about his family? Okay, his Venus and his Mars were pretty close together in a masculine sign, Sagittarius. He had no problems in marrying and having children. So the impulse was certainly there. He had a long-term marriage. But with children, now here's the 5th house. The 5th house extends from about here to about there, and it's half in Pisces, half in Aries. And as I say, it's the house of romance, but also of children. There he has the moon. The moon is a female symbol. Some would say that Pluto is a female symbol. part of this is in Pisces, part is in Aries. So he had a son who died at the age of 19 months. Then he had a succession of 3 daughters. The apple of his eye, as they say, wonderful to have the daughters. But one of them contracted meningitis and passed away in, I think, 1896, while Twain was away on his around-the-world trip with the rest of the family. She was about 24 years old, and that was Susie, his eldest daughter, and she stayed behind in New York and Connecticut and developed meningitis, and she died, I think, 3 or 4 days later. Terrible crisis, and the family, imagine the parents not being there for that. Well, in 1904, I believe it was, his wife died, and then in 1909, his youngest daughter passed away. She had been epileptic for a number of years, and the remaining daughter, Clara, met and married a Russian pianist, Gabrilowitsch, and so I don't know if that is unharmonious for the father and the daughter or what, but she wanted an independent life, and she married and moved away. And the last few years of Mark Twain's life became more and more depressed. And why did he get so depressed? He's got Saturn here in the 12th house. Here's the rising sign, but Saturn is here, not close enough to be called rising, but in the 12th house. Here's the extent of the 12th house. 12th house can be a house of fears. It can be the subconscious mind. It can be the skeletons in the closet. Lots of different things. That the 12th conveys or rules, and one of those can make a person feel kind of gloomy sometimes and depressed. And why shouldn't he be depressed with the loss of 3 members of his family, 4 including his son, that was back in the early 1870s. So with Mars and Sun together, he pressed on. With Mars and Venus together, he tried to be as cheerful as possible. He could always replenish any money that he lost, because all these were in the 2nd house, the house of money. His Mercury was incredibly fine-tuned, and he was always able to write satires and write very ironically. He loved the children's stories because Mercury has to do with children. Mercury Rising, the secrets of the world of children. Look, Scorpio, all the Plutonian secrets of children. That reminds me of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Those were kids. Those were young teenagers. But I would have to say the 5th house is ruined because of the moon, the female symbol of the moon and of the child, being in a close conjunction here with Pluto. Pluto just literally assaults the moon when it's in a conjunction with it. And Aries probably made it even worse because it's a Mars-related sign. So there's other interesting things here, very interesting things. Neptune in the 3rd house, Uranus in the 4th. Well, the 4th house, stability of the home of where he lived. Look at all the moving around he did. And that accounts for Uranus being here in the 4th house. Here's the 4th house cusp. It's the very opposite of the midheaven. So this whole area has to do with the home and the family in general, also including his parents. Well, he went out on the road at a very early age to work in print shops and things, and he was in Cincinnati and Cleveland and New York. I don't know, he was all over the place before he got a chance to be a pilot on the Mississippi. And of course that's what we hear about, is this piloting on the Mississippi. But Uranus is a planet of constant change and of rediscovering oneself, So he lived in so many places. He would live on the steamship, the paddle wheeler going up and down the Mississippi. He was involved a little bit in the first months of the Civil War. He went out to Nevada. He lived in the Virginia City area, then San Francisco, and where did he go? Was it Hawaii? He made a couple of interesting trips even, and then he went back east. Very and then from there around the world, and he was looked upon very highly by people that were from noble and very prestigious bloodlines and high education, and Lowell and Whittier and people like that in New England thought he was fantastic because he wasn't like the typical Western guy, that people thought of. He was rather progressive. I mean, when he was writing about Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, he was talking compassionately about the status of the blacks, in those stories, and so therefore he fit more in with the abolitionist, people in Massachusetts than he did with other Southerners. And at that time, of course, Missouri was counted a Southern state. Very interesting. I'm going to cut it off here, otherwise I'm going to ramble away all night. And we've just basically broken the surface on this. It's I was looking for more fun out of this reading. I'm out of this look at Mark Twain. I'm sorry we picked up some of the negatives instead, but that's what happens sometimes in life. Sometimes there's some negatives. So thank you very much for looking in.